She was standing at the altar in the most beautiful dress she had ever worn when the man she loved turned to face the congregation, cleared his throat, and said to her, You're a good person, Zara. But you're not what I need.
But you're not what I need.
You're not what I've always wanted.
You're not what I've always wanted.
He paused.
There's a standard.
You don't
meet it. Amara
does, he added without remorse of choosing her stepsister over her. The church went quiet the way churches only go quiet when something is about to break. And in the third row, 3 identical faces turned toward each other in silence. They were her now ex-fiancé bosses, and they said to her,
You deserve even better. And we will give you the best wedding ever. You belong to us now.
You belong to us now. All 3 of them said in a low voice at the same time. Welcome to Afro-Korean drama empire Chocolate Drop. Please like, share, and subscribe because this story is about to get even spicier. Her name was Zara Mensah. 28 years old, a senior event coordinator at one of Lagos's most prestigious hospitality firms, the kind of woman who could organize a 1,000-person gala in 48 hours without losing her composure. She had a laugh that filled rooms and a way of listening that made people feel like they were the only person alive. She was also, on this particular Saturday morning in October, standing at the altar of St. Matthew's Cathedral in a custom ivory gown with hand-sewn seed pearls at the neckline, holding a bouquet of white and gold chrysanthemums and beginning to understand that something was very, very wrong. David Osei had been her fiancé for 2 years. They had met at a corporate mixer, bonded over their shared dislike of warm champagne and their shared love of Fela Kuti, and built something that had felt, for most of its life, like the real thing. He was handsome, successful, socially polished, the kind of man who made excellent first impressions. What Zara had not fully understood until she was standing 12 inches from him in front of 240 guests was that David Osei was also the kind of man who was excellent at impressions and not much else. She had noticed small things over the past 3 months. The way he looked at her stepsister Amara. The way Amara always managed to be present at dinners that were supposed to be private. The way conversations stopped when Zara walked in. She had filed all of it away in a place inside herself called later and kept moving because she was good at moving forward. And she had built a life that required momentum. She had not expected the momentum to stop here. David turned from the officiant to face her, and he did not look like a man about to make a promise. He looked like a man about to correct a misunderstanding. His jaw was set. His eyes were flat in the specific way of someone who has rehearsed a conversation and is now delivering it with the particular courage that is actually just cowardice dressed in borrowed clothes. I can't do this, he said, not quietly, not into her ear, to the room. The cathedral held its breath. I've been trying to figure out how to say this for months, he continued, and Zara heard her own heartbeat very clearly, the way you hear things when the world around you has stopped making sense. You're a good person, Zara, but you're not what I need. You're not what I've always wanted. There's a standard. He paused. You don't meet it. Somewhere behind her, someone gasped, then another person, then the slow, terrible wave of it moving through the congregation, 240 people processing something so ugly it barely fit inside a church. Amara does, he said. And that was when Zara understood the full architecture of it. Because Amara, her stepsister, was standing up from the front pew on the bride's side, not looking at Zara, looking at David, with an expression that was not surprise. Zara's bouquet was in her hands, and she was still standing, and her face had not broken yet, because sometimes the body protects you from the first wave of something by simply refusing to process it. Her maid of honor, her childhood friend Abena, had made a sound behind her that was halfway between a sob and a scream. Her mother had gone completely still in the second row, the stillness of a woman who is trying to hold everything together through the force of not moving. And in the third row, 3 men in black suits rose from their seats. She had noticed them when she walked down the aisle. It was impossible not to notice them. They were identical, which was already remarkable, but it was more than that. They had the quality of men who change rooms by occupying them. Not loudly, not through performance, simply through presence, the way temperature changes when a window opens. They had sat together with a stillness that was almost ceremonial, watching the proceedings with expressions that were polite and opaque and gave nothing away. She had assumed they were David's business contacts. David had a habit of turning personal events into networking opportunities. She had not asked about them specifically because she had been focused on not crying during the ceremony from happiness, which was the problem she had been managing at the time. She had been managing entirely the wrong problem. The three men rose. They did not look at David. They looked at her. And there was something in how they looked at her that was different from anything else happening in that cathedral at that moment. Not pity, not curiosity. Something that had more weight than either of those things. The tallest one, fractionally taller than the other two, with the still face of a man who had learned to keep his reactions behind glass, stepped into the aisle. His voice, when he spoke, was low and controlled and carried through the silence the way sound carries over still water. "This ceremony is over," he said. Not to Zara, not to David, to the room. His brothers flanked him, three faces, the same face, impossibly composed. The one on his left had a stillness that was almost preternatural, the kind that comes from having made peace with the full weight of what you are. The one on his right had a slight softness to the set of his mouth that was the only visible difference between them, and which made him somehow more dangerous looking than the others, because it suggested that the softness was a choice. "We apologize for the disruption," the middle one said, and there was something in the word apologize that made it sound like the opposite of an apology. Like a formality offered not because it was needed, but because certain rituals must be observed even when you are dismantling someone else's. He looked at Zara directly. "You deserve better than this room has just offered you. You deserve even better, and we would give you the best wedding ever. You belong to us now," all three of them said in a low voice at the same time. She looked at them. She did not speak. Her voice was somewhere inside her chest, inaccessible. David had gone a particular shade of gray. He recognized these men. That was visible in how quickly he had gone quiet, how the rehearsed confidence had evacuated his face and left something simpler and smaller behind. David knew who was standing in his aisle, and the knowledge had done something immediate and complete to his posture. "Sit down," the man on the left said to David, and it was not a loud instruction, but David sat. The tallest one walked to where Zara was standing at the altar and stopped a respectful distance from her, close enough to speak quietly but not close enough to crowd her. She was a full head shorter than him, and in her ivory gown with the seed pearls and the bouquet she was still holding because she had not yet figured out what to do with her hands, she looked at his face and found it unreadable and attentive and somehow steadier than anything else in the room. "My name is Kim Ha-jin," he said. "These are my brothers, Kim Jae-won and Kim Hyun-woo." A pause. "We will explain everything. But first, do you need a moment?" She did not know why that question cracked something that all the other words had not managed to crack. She did not need a moment. She was a woman who had organized grief into categories and dealt with each one efficiently. She did not fall apart in public. She had never fallen apart in public. But something about being asked, quietly, whether she needed a moment, by a stranger who had risen from a pew to stand between her and the wreckage, something about that direct and uncomplicated act of seeing her in the middle of all this moved through her chest like a fault line shifting. "I'm fine," she said, and her voice was steady, which she would be proud of later. Ha-jin looked at her for one beat longer than the sentence required. Then he nodded. "You're fine," he agreed, and somehow he made it sound like it was the most accurate and the most dignified thing he had heard all morning. The ceremony ended in pieces. The guests were guided out by the two brothers while Ha-jin stayed at the altar. Abena appeared at Zara's side and gripped her hand and said nothing, which was the right thing to say. Zara's mother crossed the altar space and folded her daughter into her arms, and Zara stood in the embrace and breathed and kept her face still. Amara had left without speaking to anyone. David had left under what could only be described as escort, in the specific way that suggested the escort was not optional. By the time the cathedral was mostly empty, Zara was sitting in the front pew with her bouquet in her lap, and her mother beside her and Abena on her other side, and the three brothers were standing at a respectful distance near the south transept, speaking quietly among themselves, with the occasional glance in her direction that was not intrusive, but was also not nothing. She looked at them. All three looked back. The one called Hyunwoo gave her something that was close to a nod, brief and dignified. Jae-won, the one with the slight softness to his mouth, looked like he was trying to figure out how to be useful without overstepping. Hajin's expression had not changed, which she was beginning to understand was not indifference, but a very particular kind of steadiness. "Who are they?" her mother asked quietly. "I don't know," Zara said, but David sat down when they told him to. Her mother looked at the three men in their identical black suits and was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Then they are people worth knowing." That afternoon, in a private dining room of a hotel that Zara later learnt was owned by the Kim brothers through a holding company registered under a different name, she sat across a table from Ha-jin while his brothers occupied the seats on either side of him and ate food that had appeared without being ordered, because when you owned the hotel, the kitchen already knew. She had changed out of the wedding dress. Abina had brought her the emergency outfit she kept in every situation, because Abina believed in preparation the way other people believed in prayer. A deep burgundy wrap dress, her braids pinned back, the seed pearl earrings still in because she had forgotten to remove them and then decided against removing them because they were hers, and she had bought them herself, and she was not surrendering anything today. She looked at the three men and they looked at her, and she said, with the directness of a woman who was not going to waste time circling the thing, "Why were you at my wedding?" Ha-jin set down his water glass. "We were invited." "By David." "By David," he confirmed. "We have a business relationship. He handles the legitimate logistics for several of our import operations. He thought our attendance would be useful to him socially." A pause. He miscalculated several things today. "What he did to you," Jae-won said, and his voice had a quality that was different from his brother's, warmer in the same way that fire is warmer than stone, was something we were not willing to sit and observe quietly. "We are not men who sit quietly while someone is treated that way," Hyunwoo said. She looked at them. "You don't know me." "No," Ha-jin said. "But we know what we saw. And what we saw was someone who deserved better than what was given to her in that church." She was quiet for a moment. Around her, the city moved outside the windows. The afternoon light was golden and indifferent, the way afternoon light always is, continuing without reference to what anyone in the world below it is feeling. "David is one of your contractors," she said carefully. "Firing him has a cost for you." "Less than you might think," Hyunwoo said, "and considerably less than the alternative." She wanted to ask what the alternative was. She decided not to yet. Instead, she said, "What do you want from this conversation?" The three brothers looked at each other in the way that triplets apparently do, the way of people who have been sharing the same space since before language. A communication that moves too fast and too quietly for anyone outside it to fully follow. Then Ha-jin looked back at her. "We want to offer you a proposal," he said. "Not the kind that was just mishandled in a cathedral, a different kind. A business arrangement initially that would benefit you significantly and remove you from a situation that we suspect is more complicated than today made visible." She raised her eyebrow. "You're offering me a job?" "We're offering you a position," Jae-won said. "In our household, in our organization, as someone who would have the full resources and protection of the Kim family at her disposal while she decides what she wants her life to look like next." She studied each of them in turn. 3 faces. The same jaw, the same dark eyes, the same underlying architecture of bone and stillness. The same men, made different by years and choices and whatever particular weights each of them had carried alone. "You're strangers," she said. "Today," Hyunwoo said, "that's not a permanent condition." She ate something because she was hungry and because she was not going to perform devastation at a table when there was food in front of her. Then she said, "I need to think about it." Ha-jin nodded. "We expected that." "I'll give you 3 days." "However long you need," Ha-jin said, and he looked at her with an expression that she would not be able to name until much later, but which, in the moment, made her feel the strange and unsettling sensation of being seen by someone who intended to keep looking. She went home that night to the apartment she had shared with no one, and because David had his own place, and they had agreed to combine households after the wedding. She sat in her kitchen in the burgundy dress and the seed pearl earrings and looked at the wall for a long time, Then she called her mother. Then she called Abina. Then she made tea she did not drink and sat with the specific kind of quiet that follows the loudest days. She thought about 3 men in a pew. She thought about the way Hajin had said, "You're fine," and made it sound like a fact rather than reassurance. She thought about David's face when they stood and the way he had sat down without arguing. She thought about what her life looked like from the outside, stable and purposeful and well-organized, and what it looked like from the inside, which was something she had been working very hard not to examine too closely. She did not sleep easily that night. But she did sleep. The following morning, a car arrived outside her building at 8 o'clock. No message, no explanation, just a black car with a driver who stepped out and presented her with a note in precise handwriting that said, simply, "Breakfast is better when the decision doesn't have to be made alone. There is no obligation. The car will wait as long as you need." It was signed with a single initial. H. She looked at the note for a long time. Then she looked at her reflection in the building's glass door. The woman looking back at her was still wearing the seed pearl earrings. She got in the car. Over the course of 2 weeks, she learned things about the Kim brothers in the unorderly, contextual way that you learn things about people when you are spending time in their orbit. Not through formal introductions or deliberate disclosure, but through the accumulation of small moments, the way a picture assembles itself from details rather than arriving complete. Ha-jin was the eldest by 6 minutes and operated with the measured authority of someone who had been making decisions on behalf of other people since he was old enough to understand what a decision was. He ran the organization's legitimate business empire, a network of import and logistics companies, real estate holdings, and hospitality enterprises that employed over 3,000 people across 4 countries. He was the one who spoke in rooms when speaking was required. He had a way of listening that was almost uncomfortable in its completeness. Jae-won handled the organization's more delicate operations, negotiations, alliance building, the maintenance of relationships with the kind of entities that did not appear on public records. He was the warmest of the 3, which was not the same as soft. He had a habit of appearing with coffee at exactly the right moment and of asking questions that started simply and arrived somewhere she had not anticipated. Hyunwoo was the one she was longest in figuring out. He was the quietest, which in a trio of men who had all cultivated various forms of stillness was a significant distinction. He ran security. He knew where everything was and how everything connected. He had a habit of watching rooms instead of participating in them, and a habit of watching her specifically that she found alternately unsettling and in a way she was not yet willing to examine something else. She had taken the position. Not because she was without options, she had options. A career, savings, an apartment, a competence built over years of working in a demanding industry. She had taken it because when she sat alone in her kitchen the night after the cathedral, she had understood, with the clarity that comes from devastation stripping away comfortable assumptions, that she had been building a life shaped primarily around what other people needed her to be. And the Kim brothers, strange and powerful and genuinely inexplicable in the context of her life, had offered her something that no one in her recent history had thought to offer. A question. What do you want your life to look like? She had not known the answer, but she had decided she wanted to find out. Her official role was event coordination for the Kim family's hospitality holdings. She was good at it the way she was good at everything she committed to, specifically and rigorously. She redesigned the event scheduling system for 3 of their hotels in her first week. She renegotiated a supplier contract in her second week that saved a substantial amount and resulted in the supplier sending a gift basket and a handwritten note about how much he appreciated working with someone who actually read contracts. Hyunwoo had found her in the office late on a Tuesday evening going through the supplier files and had stood in the doorway for a moment before saying simply, "You should eat something." She had looked up and said she was fine. He had looked at her with the expression she was beginning to recognize as specific to him, the one that did not argue but also did not accept. And 20 minutes later, a full meal had appeared on the corner of her desk. He had not stayed. He had not made anything of it. It was simply there. She had eaten all of it. She had been in the position for 3 weeks when David called for the first time. She had blocked his number the day after the wedding, so the call came through on a number she didn't recognize, and she answered it without knowing who it was, which was the kind of thing that happened when you were coordinating 17 events simultaneously and could not afford to ignore unknown callers. Zara. His voice, careful and measured in the way of a man who had rehearsed. She was quiet for 1 second. Then she said, "This number will be blocked in approximately 30 seconds. "Wait, please, I made a mistake." The words came quickly. The rehearsed part running out ahead of the genuine part, if there was a genuine part. "Amara and it's already complicated. It was already complicated within the first week. I should have never. I need to explain. I need you to hear me out." "You have 20 seconds, she said. Not because she was going to change anything, but because she believed in efficiency. "She isn't. She doesn't. What I thought I wanted isn't, Zara. I was wrong. I have never been more wrong about anything, and I'm asking if there's any possibility that we can, that you would be willing to, that some form of conversation could happen between us that would let me explain." "Time," she said, and ended the call, and blocked the number. She sat with her phone in her hand for a moment, then she looked back at the supplier files. She did not tell any of the brothers about the call that day, but the following morning, Hajin knocked on the open door of her office and sat down in the chair across from her desk, and said, without preamble, "David Osei made contact yesterday." She looked at him. "You have my calls monitored?" "We have his calls monitored," Hajin said. "He works for us, until recently. His access to our network has been revoked, but certain tracking remains active through his company devices, which he has not yet returned." A pause. "I apologize. I should have mentioned the monitoring before this came up. It was not intended to be surveillance of you." She considered this. "What did he say to your monitoring team that they passed to you?" "That he had called you. That the call lasted 22 seconds. His expression had not changed, but there was something underneath it that she was learning to read, the quality of a man who is being very precise about what he shows. "I wanted you to know that we're aware of the contact and that we will make sure it doesn't happen again through our systems." "He said it was already complicated with Amara," she said, not because she needed Hajin to know, but because she found, unexpectedly, that saying it out loud to someone who was listening carefully made it smaller rather than larger. Hajin was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "In my experience, men like David Osei do not experience complications. They create them and then call them something else." He stood. "The complication is his. It will stay his. You have nothing to resolve with him." She looked at him as he stood in her office doorway in the early morning light. "You say things like that very simply," she said. "Because they are simple," he said, and left. 3 days later, Amara called. Zara answered that one too. It was a different kind of call, less rehearsed, more desperate, with the specific frequency of someone who has discovered that the thing they reached for was not what they imagined and has not yet decided whether to admit that publicly. Amara said several things, that she had not meant for it to happen the way it happened, that David had pursued her, that she had been weak, that the wedding had been his idea, the public declaration. She had told him it was too much, that she was sorry, that she did not expect forgiveness, that she wanted Zara to know she was sorry. Zara listened to all of it. Then she said, "You were in the front pew at my wedding, Amara, in the bride section. You knew what was going to happen and you were there for it." Silence. "I'm not angry," Zara said, and this surprised her a little, the accuracy of it. "I'm something, but it isn't anger. It's more like I looked at my life and I realized that I had not looked at it clearly for a very long time, and you and David helped me do that, in the worst possible way, but you helped. So I'm not calling you for forgiveness or conversation. I'm calling this the end of whatever we were pretending we were." More silence. "I'll send for my things from the family house next week," Zara said. "Please make sure they're accessible." She ended the call. Then she went back to work because there were 17 events to coordinate, and one of the hotel's sound systems had developed a problem that needed addressing before Saturday. By the end of her first month, she had become something that was difficult to categorize within the Kim organization. Not simply an employee, The three brothers consulted her on things that were not technically within her portfolio: the layout of a new event space, the tone of a public-facing communication, the handling of a delicate situation with a long-standing partner that required someone with social intelligence and composure to navigate. She was good at these things, and she did not overreach, and she did not underperform, and she held her ground when she thought she was right, in a way that was precise rather than aggressive. Hajin noticed. Jaewon noticed loudly, by which she meant he said so directly, told her at lunch one day that she was the most competent person he had encountered in a professional context in years, which she received without deflecting because she had decided she was done deflecting compliments she had actually earned. Hyunwoo noticed differently. She would look up from her desk and find him in the doorway, having appeared silently the way he did everything, and he would have coffee or a question or occasionally simply a look that said something she could not yet fully translate. She told herself she was not thinking about Hyunwoo specifically more than she was thinking about the other two. This was not entirely accurate. The problem with Hyunwoo was that he paid a kind of attention that was difficult to be comfortable under. Not intrusive. Not aggressive. The specific, quiet, thorough attention of someone who is genuinely interested in what they are looking at, who watches you the way a careful reader moves through a text they find meaningful, wanting to understand rather than simply to see. She caught him once reading over her event proposal, not because he had asked to, but because she had left it on the conference table, and he had been in the room and had apparently found it absorbing. When she came back for it, he handed it to her and said, "The vendor sequencing in Section 3 is more efficient than the previous proposal." "I know," she said. He almost smiled. "I know you know," he said. "I was saying it because I think you should hear it from someone who wasn't obligated to say it." She took the proposal. She looked at him for a moment. Oh, he looked back at her with that steady, unhurried quality. Then she said, "Thank you," and left the room before the moment became something that required additional management. In her apartment that evening, she sat with a cup of tea that she actually drank this time and thought about the strange shape her life had taken. The cathedral, the altar, the bouquet in her hands, the three men rising from the third pew. The weeks since, the work, the gradual and unexpected process of a life opening into something it had not been before. She thought about Hajin saying, "It isn't permanent." She thought about Jaewon appearing with coffee at exactly the right moment. She thought about Hyunwoo in the doorway, about food appearing on her desk without fanfare, about the way he said, "I know you know," as if it were something important. She put down her cup. She looked at the wall. She was in considerable trouble. A week later, the trouble increased in complexity when they received word that a rival faction had been tracking the Kim organization's event schedule. Not the criminal operations, which had their own security architecture. The legitimate hospitality business. Someone had been mapping who attended which events, which partners were present at which gatherings, building an intelligence picture of the organization's alliances and relationships. Hyunwoo had discovered this through methods he did not fully explain, but which involved the kind of cross-referencing that required significant infrastructure. He brought it to the brothers in a morning meeting that Zara attended because several of her events were on the schedule in question. He explained the situation with the economy of someone who understands that clarity is more useful than detail in a first briefing. Then he looked at Zara and said, "3 of the events with the highest exposure are ones you've organized." "Tell me what you need from my end," she said. "We'll need to adjust the vendor lists," Hajin said. "Change some access arrangements. Hyunwoo will walk you through the security modifications." "I'll adjust the schedules accordingly," she said. They worked through the modifications over the following 2 days. She and Hyunwoo sat across from each other in the operations room for hours at a stretch, going through logistics, adjusting guest lists, rebuilding vendor access protocols with the quiet efficiency of 2 people who were good at the same kind of problem from different angles. She was aware of him the entire time, not distractingly, as a presence, a warmth in the room that had a specific location. On the second evening, near midnight, when the modifications were mostly complete and the building had gone quiet around them, she said, without looking up from her laptop, "You've been doing this a long time." "Security?" He looked up from his own screen. "Since I was 22. Was it a choice?" He considered this with the thoroughness he brought to everything. "It became one," he said. "Initially it was a role. There were 3 of us and certain things needed covering, but I found that I was good at it, and that I understood it in a way that was more than technical." "What way?" "I understand why people take things," he said. "What they're afraid of, what they're protecting. Security is fundamentally about understanding fear." He looked at her. "It helps to have experienced it." She looked up. "What were you afraid of?" He was quiet for a moment, and she thought he was going to redirect, the way powerful people often redirect when the conversation approaches something real. But he said, "Losing my brothers. When we were young, there were people who understood that the 3 of us together were a specific kind of force, and who therefore wanted to separate us. I spent a long time learning how to make sure that didn't happen." She looked at him across the table, across the scattered papers and the laptops and the cold cups of coffee. "And now?" His eyes moved over her face in the way he had, the reading rather than seeing. "Now," he said, "the list of things worth protecting has grown." She looked back at her laptop. Her heart was doing something that her brain was firmly instructing it to discontinue. She finished her section of the work and closed her laptop and said, "Same time tomorrow," and left before the room became any warmer. The thing she could not manage was that all 3 of them seemed to feel it. Not in the way of men competing, not with any of the friction that should theoretically exist when 3 identical brothers are all directing significant attention at the same woman. Instead, it was something that made no conventional sense but felt, somehow, natural. They were not 3 separate entities trying to occupy the same space. They were 3 parts of something that operated as a whole, and the whole, collectively, they had decided something about her that none of them had apparently needed to discuss. She brought it up with Jae-won one afternoon because he was the easiest to be direct with. She said, "I need to understand what's happening here." He set down his coffee cup. He looked at her with the expression of someone who had been waiting for this question and had thought about how to answer it. "We have never," he said carefully, "operated separately in anything that mattered to all 3 of us. That's not a convenient arrangement. It's who we are. Ha-jin makes decisions. Hyun-woo protects what those decisions build. I maintain the connections that allow both of those things to function. We have always been 3 parts of one thing." He looked at her steadily. "When we saw you in that cathedral, when we watched what happened to you in that room, something happened that I won't try to explain in terms that make sense outside of what we are." He paused. "We recognized you." She looked at him. "You don't know me." "We didn't," he said. "That's different from not recognizing someone." She sat with that for the rest of the day and did not fully resolve it, but also did not fully dismiss it, which was its own kind of answer. The rival faction's activity escalated 2 weeks later. Not into direct confrontation, but into something more targeted, an approach to 3 of the Kim organization's key business partners, suggesting that the Kim brothers were facing internal instability. It was the kind of move that did damage slowly, through rumor and erosion of confidence rather than force. Ha-jin moved through the response with the composure of someone who had prepared for exactly this kind of thing and had made preparations in advance. He met with each partner personally. He brought documentation. He was precisely as reassuring as the situation required and precisely as direct as each partner needed him to be. Zara attended 2 of these meetings because the partners in question were ones she had built relationships with through her event work, and her presence communicated something that no amount of documentation could fully replicate. After the second meeting, in the car back to the office, Ha-jin said, "You were the reason that meeting succeeded." "You brought the documentation," she said. "I brought the evidence," he said. "You brought the trust. They believed us because they believed you. Because you've spent 3 months building something with them that isn't transactional." He looked at her. "That's worth more than documentation." She looked out the car window. "You should tell your PR team to use that." "I'm telling you first," he said. And there was something in how he said it that landed in a different place than most things that were told to her. The escalation reached a different level 3 days later when someone broke into her apartment. She was not home when it happened. She came home from an evening event to find her door slightly ajar in the way that doors are slightly ajar when someone has been careless about closing them or in a hurry, and she understood before she stepped inside that something was wrong. She called Hyun-woo's number, which was the first number she thought of, and he answered on the second ring and said only, "Don't go inside, I'm 8 minutes away." He was there in 6. He moved through her apartment with the focused precision of someone who has done this kind of assessment many times, methodical, thorough, checking every room. She stood in the corridor outside and told herself she was not scared, and was mostly right. The physical fact of the intrusion was less disturbing than the implication of it, that someone had decided to find out where she lived, that the rival faction's escalation had specifically included her in its target. Hyun-woo came back to the corridor with his expression set and a look in his eyes that was not calm. It was controlled, which was different. She had learned the difference. "Nothing was taken," he said, "but the search was thorough. They were looking for something specific." "What?" "My guess is access to communications or scheduling documents related to our events. You carry a lot of the operational intelligence for the next quarter." He looked at her, and in the carefully maintained composure of his face, there was something underneath it, tighter and more active than his usual stillness. "You're not staying here tonight." She wanted to argue. She decided not to because arguing against a professionally valid assessment was not the same as maintaining independence. "I'll pack a bag," she said. "I'll be here," he said. Not moving from the corridor, standing between her and whatever had already come and gone. She packed efficiently because she was always efficient, and when she came back out with her bag, Hyun-woo took it from her without asking and carried it to the car in a gesture so unremarkable in its naturalness that she almost did not notice it. Almost. She stayed at the Kim estate for 3 days while the security situation was assessed and managed. She had a guest suite that was larger than her apartment and a view of a garden that was better maintained than most public parks. She was not treated like a guest exactly. She was treated like someone whose presence in the house was expected, which was its own kind of thing. Ha-jin briefed her on the investigation each evening. Jae-won brought her into conversations about the response strategy in ways that asked for her perspective rather than just her information. Hyun-woo appeared outside her suite door each morning with coffee, said good morning, and did not linger, which required her to not think about it in the evenings before she fell asleep. She was doing a very poor job of not thinking about it. On the second evening, she found Hyun-woo in the garden near the east wall. He was sitting on a stone bench in the dark, looking at nothing specific, with the particular quality of someone who has found a moment of genuine quiet inside a life that doesn't offer many. She should have turned back. She did not turn back. She sat down on the other end of the bench and looked at the same nothing he was looking at, and for a while they sat in a silence that was comfortable in the way that silences are comfortable when neither person in them is performing anything. "Are you always working?" she asked. "Right now I'm not working," he said. "You're out here watching the perimeter." "I'm out here sitting on a bench," he said, and something in his voice was almost wry. "The perimeter observation is incidental." She looked at him. He looked back. In the low light of the garden, his face had the quality of something settled and real, and she felt the particular mix of wanting to look away and not being able to, that she was learning to associate with him specifically. "What happened in the apartment?" she said. "That was because of your business." "Yes. That's not something I signed up for when I took this position." "No," he said. "It isn't. And I won't tell you should have expected it, because you shouldn't have had to, and I won't tell you it's resolved because it isn't fully resolved yet." He looked at her directly. "What I can tell you is that nothing will happen to you while you're within my capacity to prevent it. That's not a corporate assurance. That's a personal one." She looked at the garden. "That's a very large promise." "I make large promises carefully," he said, "which is why I don't make them often." She thought about the cathedral, about 3 men standing in a pew, about Ha-jin saying, "You're fine," and making it sound true, about food on her desk and coffee in the mornings and the way Jae-won asked questions that arrived somewhere unexpected, about Hyun-woo on a stone bench in the dark, making a large promise carefully. "I need to tell you something," she said. He waited. I came to this position because I was at a crossroads, and this was the most interesting door that was open, she said. That was my reason. It was honest, but it was also incomplete. I've been figuring out the rest of it. He looked at her without moving. The rest of it, she said, is that I think I was always someone who worked very hard at things that were shaped to fit someone else's idea of what my life should look like. And coming here, working with you and your brothers, being in a room where the question being asked is what do you want, and not just what do you have to offer, that has been. She stopped. It has been something I didn't know I needed. He was quiet for a moment. What do you want? He asked. Not rhetorically, the actual question. She looked at the garden for a long moment. I want a life that belongs to me, she said. I want work that means something. I want to be around people who see me clearly. She paused. I think I want to be here. The silence that followed had a different quality than the previous one. Then be here, Hyunwoo said. Simply, like it was the most natural conclusion in the world. She looked at him. Something happened in the air between them, a shift in temperature, in gravity, in the specific way the night felt around them. He looked at her the way he always did, the reading rather than seeing, and she looked back and for once did not manage the looking, just let it happen. He reached out slowly and took her hand where it rested on the bench between them. He did not pull her toward him. He simply held her hand in the still dark of the garden with the careful, certain quality of someone doing something they have thought about for a long time. She let him. They sat like that for a while. The garden was quiet. Somewhere in the house behind them, his brothers were moving through their evening, and the house was full of the particular warmth of a place that belongs to people who belong to each other. She thought about belonging, about what it felt like to be in the right place. When she went back inside, she did not sleep immediately. She lay in the guest suite looking at the ceiling and thought about what came next, and found, to her surprise and her relief, that she was not afraid of it. The security situation was resolved with the particular thoroughness that the Kim organization brought to everything it decided to resolve. The rival factions' contacts were identified, their approach to the business partners was documented and countered, and their access to the event schedule was cut through a restructuring that Zara helped design, and that was, in her professional estimation, significantly more elegant than the previous system. 3 of the faction's senior operatives appeared to experience a series of unfortunate business setbacks in quick succession. No one was harmed. No one needed to be harmed. The Kim brothers understood that the most efficient way to eliminate a threat was to remove its resources and its confidence, and they were very good at doing both. David called again, on a number he had apparently obtained through means that spoke poorly of his judgment and his understanding of his current situation. He was no longer a contractor for the Kim organization. His company had lost 4 of its major clients in the past 6 weeks through what appeared to be a combination of performance issues, compliance concerns, and a general reassessment of partnership value by entities that happened to have relationships with the Kim family. He was not yet poor. He was heading there. I love you, Zara, he said to her with guilt in his voice. I made the worst mistake of my life. I and Amara have ended things, and I am alone now. I have nothing. You are the only person in the world who had ever actually seen me, and I want you back. She listened to all of it. Then she said, I think you loved the idea of me more than you ever saw me clearly, and I think I allowed that for longer than I should have because I was focused on building something and not paying enough attention to what I was building it with. Zara paused. I hope you find your way, David. I genuinely mean that. But I'm not any part of where you're going. She ended the call and went back to work and did not think about him again in any way that lingered. Amara sent a message 3 weeks later. Not a call. A written message, carefully worded, that asked for nothing and offered a full and unrehearsed apology that Zara could tell had cost something to write. She did not respond immediately. She sat with it for 2 days. Then she sent back 2 sentences. I received this. I don't know yet what it means for us, but I received it. She left the conversation there, in that honest uncertainty, and moved forward. The thing that happened between her and the 3 brothers happened slowly and then completely. the way things happen when they are real rather than constructed. She understood that what they were offering her was not something that had a template. 3 brothers, 1 woman, the kind of love that most people did not have a category for, and which the 3 of them approached with the same collective, whole-entity certainty they brought to everything. They were not competing for her. They were not dividing her. They were, in the most fundamental sense, one thing that loved her entirely. Ha-jin told her one evening, in the simple, direct way that was his language, that he had not known, in all the years of running the organization and building the empire and making the decisions that kept everything and everyone within the Kim orbit safe and operational, buying that there was a specific kind of quiet that he had been missing until she walked into his conference room and looked at him like she was trying to decide whether to trust him. And he had understood, with a clarity that was not analytical, that the only thing he wanted was to be worth trusting. Jae-won told her, over breakfast on a Tuesday morning with the warm simplicity that was his particular way of being direct, that he had spent his life maintaining connections between people and had always understood the value of connection intellectually, but that there was a difference between understanding something intellectually and feeling it as a fact that reorganized everything else. And she had reorganized everything else. Hyunwoo said nothing for a long time. And then one evening, me standing in the kitchen doorway while she was making tea in the Kim estate's kitchen, because she had started treating the estate as a place she lived in rather than visited, he said, from behind her, quietly, "I'm not going to lose you." It was not a declaration. It was a fact being stated. She had turned and looked at him and understood that he had been waiting to say it for months and that it contained everything he had not said in the garden and every morning outside her door and every time he had appeared in a doorway watching her work. "You're not losing me," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm stating it. For the record." She had laughed and his face had done the thing it did, the thing that was not quite a smile and was entirely him. And she had crossed the kitchen and stood in front of him and said, "For the record," and he had looked at her for a long moment, the careful, thorough look that she had learned to stop trying to hold steady under. And then he had pulled her in, gently and with complete certainty, and held her in the specific way of someone who had thought about this and was being careful with it. The wedding was Ha-jin's idea, which surprised her, because she had expected it to be Jae-won's. Ha-jin came to her one afternoon with a specific proposal, outlined with the precision he brought to everything, though underneath the precision there was something that she recognized as the most genuine form of vulnerability she had seen from him, a man unarmored by the importance of the question. They had been discussing contracts for a new hotel partnership, and he had set down his pen and looked at her and said, I want to talk about something different." She had set down her own pen. "The ceremony in October," he said. "The one that did not happen for the reasons it should have happened. I want to propose something to replace it." He looked at her with the full weight of his attention. "A ceremony that is yours, that belongs to you, not arranged around someone else's narrative or staged for someone else's benefit. Something for you, organized by us, offered because you deserve to be celebrated in the way that should have happened the first time but with people who mean it." She had been quiet for a moment. "You're proposing a wedding." "We're proposing a wedding," he corrected. "The 3 of us, for you." She looked at the 3 men who had risen from a pew in a cathedral when the world had been unkind to her, who had built something around her over months that was more real and more solid than anything she had believed she could have, who had offered her a question and waited for her to find the answer and had not tried to provide it for her. "Yes," she said. The ceremony was held in the spring. It was, by objective measure, the most beautiful wedding Zara Mensah had ever attended, which was professionally convenient since she had organized much of it herself, working with the event teams of 2 of the Kim hotels and an external designer who was given a specific brief that she described as magnificent but human. The dress was designed specifically for her, which she had initially considered an excess and had been gently persuaded out of that position by Jae-won, who had pointed out that she had worn a wedding dress that was almost hers, and the distinction between almost and entirely was worth accounting for. The dress was deep ivory silk with a train that moved like water and a neckline that showed her shoulders and collarbone and the long lines of her neck in a way that made the entire Kim family's security team briefly and professionally forget what they were doing. She wore the seed pearl earrings. Her mother was in the front row. Abina was her maid of honor. On the other side of the aisle, in the seats that had previously been used for David's business contacts, were the people who made up the actual fabric of the Kim organization and the Kim brothers' lives. 300 guests, every one of them present because they were genuinely meant to be there. Ha-jin stood at the altar first. By arrangement, because he was the eldest, and because he had spent his adult life being the first to stand in the space that needed occupying. He watched her come down the aisle on her father's arm with an expression that he would never, not once in his remaining life, be able to fully compose back into the stillness he usually maintained. She saw it from halfway down the aisle, and something in her chest settled into a certainty that had been building for months. She stood before the three of them, and they looked at her, and she looked back, and the officiant began to speak, and the spring light came through the windows in long, warm columns, and Zara Mensah married the Kim brothers with full knowledge of what she was choosing and why she was choosing it. Jae-won cried. He did not hide it, and did not try to. Ha-jin kept his composure with such effort that it was its own form of emotion. Hyun-woo looked at her through the entire ceremony with the steady, thorough attention that she had learned was his way of saying everything he could not put into words. And she looked back at him and did not look away, and the officiant said the words, and they said their responses, and it was done. The reception lasted until late in the evening and was exactly the kind of event that she was exceptionally good at organizing and had allowed herself to enjoy rather than manage, a distinction she was learning to make. Her mother danced with Jae-won and found him delightful. Abina and Hyun-woo had a conversation in a corner of the garden that lasted 40 minutes and appeared to involve significant depth of analysis. And Abina later described him as the most interesting person she had ever encountered, which was, coming from Abina, a considerable statement. Ha-jin danced with Zara once, near the end of the evening, and held her properly and moved with her in the slow, quiet way of someone who had been waiting to do something for a long time and is now doing it without haste because haste would be disrespectful to the moment. He said close to her ear, "I'm glad that you had gotten into the car that morning." Zara smiled, said, "I'm glad the coffee had still been warm." He made a sound that was entirely and genuinely a laugh, and she filed it away in the place she kept things that were worth keeping. Later that night, their estate was silent except for the storm outside. Rain slid down the massive glass windows while candlelight flickered across Zara Mensah's skin, making the gold details of her wedding dress glow softly. Her pulse refused to calm as the three Kim brothers watched her like predators trying not to lose control. The doors shut behind Zara Mensah with a soft click that echoed through the candlelit suite. Gold flames danced against black marble walls, casting shadows over the three men waiting for her. Kim Ha-jin stood near the window, loosening his tie slowly, eyes dark and unreadable. Kim Hyun-woo sat on the edge of the bed, sleeves rolled up, gaze fixed on her like he was fighting for control. And Kim Jae-won leaned against the wall, expression dangerously calm. Zara swallowed hard. The gold jewelry around her wrists trembled faintly as she stepped farther into the room. The heavy wedding dress suddenly felt too warm, too tight. "You belong to us now," all three of them said in a low voice at the same time. Zara stood speechless. "Come here," Ha-jin said quietly, but she stood glued to her spot. Kim Ha-jin stepped toward her, slow and confident. His dark suit jacket hung open now, his tie loosened just enough to reveal the sharp line of his throat. "You've been avoiding our eyes all night," he said quietly. Zara lifted her chin. "Maybe because the three of you stare too much." A smirk tugged at Ha-jin's lips. Behind him, Kim Hyun-woo laughed softly, low and dangerously. "Can you blame us?" Kim Jae-won closed the distance behind her, his presence warm against her back. Zara's breath caught instantly. Trapped, not in fear, in tension. Jae-won's fingers slid slowly over her wrist, it brushing against the jewelry Ha-jin had placed there during the ceremony. "You wore our name beautifully tonight." Zara tried to respond, but Hyun-woo moved closer, gently tucking a loose curl behind her ear. "You're nervous?" he murmured. "Anyone would be." Hajin tilted her face upward carefully, his gaze lingering on her lips before meeting her eyes again. "Then let us make this easier." And before she could answer, he kissed her. Slow, dangerously slow, the kind of kiss that stole the air from her lungs little by little. Zara's fingers instinctively curled against his chest as he deepened it slightly, his hand settling at her waist possessively. Behind her, Jaewon's hand remained on her hip, steadying her when her knees weakened. Hyunwoo watched with dark eyes before stepping closer and brushing his lips softly against her temple once Hajin finally pulled away. "You have no idea what you do to us," Hyunwoo whispered. Zara's cheeks burned. Hajin rested his forehead briefly against hers, breathing unevenly now despite his calm appearance. "Careful," he warned his brothers quietly, though his voice carried amusement. "She already looks overwhelmed." Jaewon smirked faintly. "Too late for that." Tracing their fingers from her face to down to her hips, they claimed her lips hungrily, and a soft moan escaped her lips. Hajin placed kisses all over her body till he knelt down under her in between her soaked legs and placed his lips, eating like his life depended on it, and the other brothers did the same. Zara couldn't muffle the sounds again as she let it all out the moment she felt hot liquid exploding out of her. The storm outside grew louder while the tension inside the room became almost unbearable, and Zara realized, lying between the three dangerously devoted Kim brothers, that her wedding night was only just beginning. David Osei, by the spring of that year, had lost the majority of his business contracts and was in the process of restructuring what remained of his company. He attended none of the events that had been organized by the Kim Hospitality Network, which constituted a significant portion of the corporate event landscape in the city. He was not blacklisted in any official sense. He was simply absent from the rooms where things happened, which amounted to the same thing. He sent one final message to Zara on the morning of the wedding, a brief and genuinely painful message that she read once and did not respond to. She did not hate him. She had not the energy for hate and no particular use for it. Amara sent flowers, no note. Zara put them in a vase on her office windowsill and did not yet know what it meant, but also did not throw them away. She found out she was pregnant on an ordinary Tuesday in autumn, 6 months after the wedding, during a routine check because she had been tired in a way that was different from her usual tiredness, and the doctor had looked at her results and congratulated her and asked if she needed a moment to sit with the news. She said she was fine, which she was, which she had always been, which was a statement that had accumulated layers of meaning over the preceding year. She told them that evening. All three, in the kitchen of the estate that was home now in every sense of the word, while she was making tea because making tea was still how she organized important moments. She said it simply, in the middle of a conversation about something entirely unrelated, because she had learned that the most significant things were often best said plainly. The silence that followed lasted about 4 seconds. Then Jaewon made a sound that was joy in its most immediate and unedited form. Hajin sat down, which she had never seen him do involuntarily, and pressed his hands flat on the kitchen table and breathed in a way that suggested he was managing something very large, very carefully. Hyunwoo crossed the kitchen without speaking and held her, the way he had on the night in the garden, with the full weight of someone who has been careful about things for a long time and is allowing himself to stop being careful. "You're not fine," he said into her hair, which was incorrect, but she understood what he meant. "I am," she said. "We are." She felt the others move into the room around them, and they were together in the kitchen with the autumn evening outside the windows and the tea going cold and everything settled and whole and real. She stood there, held, and thought about the woman in ivory in a cathedral in October, standing with chrysanthemums she was still holding because she hadn't figured out what to do with her hands. She thought about 3 men rising from a pew, about a car outside her building and a note signed H, about seed pearl earrings and supplier files and a stone bench in the dark and a garden in spring. About a life that had, by the grace of its own strange and difficult path, arrived somewhere it was supposed to be. She was the queen of their empire. They loved and adored her. And Zara Mensah, who had always been exactly who she was, had finally found people who understood that this was the most extraordinary thing about her. My chocolate drops. If this story moved something in you, you know exactly what to do. Like, share, and subscribe to Afro-Korean Drama Empire. Drop in the comments the moment that got you the most, because we are reading all of them. And we will see you in the next one.